Now we're diving into the full retelling of Necroscope V, Deadspawn, the final book in the original arc. The world had moved on since the disappearance of Harry Keogh, or so it liked to pretend. The vampires were quieter, the psychic turbulence from the Mobius continuum had gone still, and E-Branch, the ESP intelligence division, had begun to behave more like a Cold War counterintelligence agency than a supernatural strike team. But beneath the surface of things, beneath Earth, beneath the dead soil of other worlds, and within the continuum itself, nothing had gone quiet. It had only gone deeper, and Harry had not vanished. He had evolved. When he returned, he did not come back as a man. What stood in the world again was something that had been Harry. His mind, his memories, his moral compass, but now fused with the alien metamorphic slime from Starside. His new body could change, grow, heal, and adapt far beyond human limits, but his soul, the part that still whispered to the dead, that still walked the Mobius paths, was intact. More than intact. It had been sharpened. The continuum flowed through him effortlessly now. He was a being of both flesh and math, of grief and vengeance, of unbearable empathy and terrifying potential. But as is always the case in Brian Lumley's world, power attracts darkness. In Eastern Europe, something ancient was waking in a secret Soviet facility near the Carpathian Mountains, buried deeper than any Cold War bunker. A long-forgotten experiment was stirring. Years ago, Soviet scientists had attempted to reverse engineer what Dragosani had glimpsed in the source world, a method of recreating the Vamphyri infection synthetically. They had failed, or so they believed. What they had actually done was create something new, something seeded from the remains of a Vamphyri creature, combined with human experimentation and nurtured in darkness. That something was waking now. E-Branch noticed the signs first, not in spy reports or intercepted radio chatter, but in psychic noise. Murderers were becoming more common, but not random. They were precise, surgical, like someone was testing how far the human psyche could be pushed, then snapped. Then there were the dead themselves. The dead speak that had once filled the nights with whispers now carried static. The voices were fewer, weaker. Some were missing entirely. It was as if someone or something was devouring the dead. Ben Trask and Norman Wellesley didn't want to believe it, but all the signs pointed to a single conclusion. Something Vamphyri had reemerged on Earth. And unlike before, it wasn't looking to conquer, it was looking to transform. And then came the murders in Paris. A woman was found with her throat ripped open, her blood drained, not in a savage way, but delicately, cleanly. Her corpse glowed faintly to psychic observers like a beacon that had been deliberately left behind. The scene had no psychic residue of the killer, none, as if they were outside time. Yeah, that was when Trask gave the order. E-Branch was to reassemble a special task force. If Harry Keogh was alive, they would find him. And if he was not, then someone would have to become him. But Harry wasn't hiding. He had already felt the ripples of the murders. The continuum had whispered them to him before the bodies were even found. The dead had screamed, but not in words, in silence. Because something had silenced them. He traveled not across roads, but through folded space. The Mobius paths opened like lungs around him. He moved through the folds with ease now, but there was something new, resistance. The continuum had always obeyed him. Now in some places it pushed back, as if something else was also traveling its corridors. And then he saw it, not a vampire in the traditional sense, not one of the Lords of Starside, but a spawn, a being twisted and reborn not through natural infection, but grown, cultured even, built by science, with the Vamphyri seed grafted onto human DNA and nurtured in isolation. It had emerged not from a leech or a symbiote, but from Soviet ingenuity and spiritual ignorance. Harry tracked it to the outskirts of Prague, where it had taken the body of a young man and worn it like a suit. It was feeding on the dead, not just the blood, but the echoes of the dead. It was learning from their last memories, stealing psychic signatures, and then disappearing. It wasn't creating thralls or followers, it was digesting them. It had learned the Mobius continuum from the inside out through the bones of those who had once spoken to Harry. It was a vampire that could move like Harry Keogh. Harry followed the thing that had once been a man through the Mobius continuum, but it was slippery, wrong. Unlike Harry, who moved with mathematical grace and control, this creature tore through the folds like it was wading through curtains, tearing holes as it passed. The continuum responded like a wounded animal. Space warped, patterns jittered, and Harry felt Mobius itself retreating from the thing. It wasn't built to house this kind of presence. The creature was not merely using the continuum, it was scarring it. This wasn't a Vamphyri vampire in the traditional sense. It was something new, a synthetic evolution. It fed on psychic residue. It wore memory like perfume. It could slip into the minds of others and manipulate them from within. Worse, it was learning fast. Harry doubled back, dropped out of the fold, and stood on the roof of a hospital in Vienna. He needed grounding. The dead here spoke to him in frightened fragments, like a room full of whispering patients, all hiding from something in the dark. He tried to draw one of them into focus, an old woman who had died in the building 2 weeks earlier, but she recoiled. The thing had already been here. It had walked these halls. It had touched the minds of the dying before they passed and left behind a kind of psychic frostbite. Not a possession, not exactly, but a violation. The dead themselves had been used, their final thoughts peeled away, their last truths swallowed whole. At E-Branch headquarters, Trask was assembling a profile. The psychic footprint from Prague matched several incidents in the Balkans, all targeted areas with high concentrations of violent death, hospitals, asylum cemeteries, old war zones. This wasn't random killing, it was study, and each time it fed, it left fewer and fewer ripples for E-Branch to detect. The thing was learning to go silent. Worse, the victims were starting to show signs of transformation, not into vampires, but into nodes. Living conduits, people whose thoughts weren't entirely their own anymore, as if the creature wasn't just feeding, but networking. Harry knew what it meant. The creature wasn't hunting for blood, it was hunting for identity. It was building itself one stolen mind at a time. Then came the tipping point. In a morgue in Hamburg, a body disappeared. Not just stolen, erased. The slab was empty, the cameras blank. All that remained was a faint scorch in space that only Mobius walkers like Harry could see, a trace that led into the continuum and then dispersed like ink in water. This meant the creature had crossed fully into the Mobius flow. It had learned enough from the psychic dead to enter the math itself. It had become a Deadspawn, a thing born of the dead shaped by science, empowered by the continuum. And it had no name because it had eaten all the ones it had worn. Harry followed. He closed his eyes, opened the folds, and walked into the spiral. The Mobius continuum, normally clean and elegant in its curvature, was pitted now, bruised, the paths twisted through wrong angles. He moved carefully, tracing the echo left behind, one impossible point at a time. At first he thought it was leading him in circles, but it wasn't. The creature was nesting. It had found a spot in the continuum to anchor itself, where it could feed on the endless dead of all time. It was building a psychic womb in folded space, and it was no longer alone. Harry stepped through and found himself in a place that wasn't Earth, wasn't Starside, and wasn't Mobius. It was a bubble inside the fold, a sphere made of memory, blood, and whispers. In the center stood the creature, now grown, shifting rapidly between shapes it had stolen. It had faces from 30 lives, voices layered in stereo, and it smelled like morning and medicine and acid. It turned to Harry, smiled with 6 mouths, and said, "Father." Not in Harry's voice, not in the creature's, but in the voice of one of Harry's victims, someone he had failed to save, someone long dead. It was mimicking Harry's guilt. That was its weapon. The creature lunged, The battle that followed was not physical, not entirely. It took place across layers: psychic, spatial, mathematical. They clashed inside the continuum, ripping Mobius strands apart, reshaping geometry with their wills. Harry split into echoes of himself, mirrored through dimensions, striking from 5 angles. The creature dissolved and reformed, throwing stolen memories at him like knives. It screamed with the voice of Brenda, of young Harry Jr., of Fethor, of Dragosani. It tried to undo him with grief, but Harry had walked through too much death to be undone by guilt. He wrapped the Mobius strands around the creature's core, its identity, its center, and saw it for what it truly was: a failed experiment, a stolen shell, a fragment of Vamphyri tissue that had been incubated in psychic trauma until it believed it was alive. Harry spoke one word, the true Mobius word for collapse, and the continuum folded inward. The Deadspawn imploded, the screams ceased, and the continuum sighed. Harry returned to Earth weak, shaking but whole. The dead came back to him like ripples after a storm. He lay on a riverbank in Italy, watching the stars reset themselves in the sky. For a moment, the voices of the dead were silent, not in fear, but in reverence. Then one of them whispered, "There's another." And Harry knew it wasn't over.